G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So, a while back, I started looking for a matching puzzle game that could give me a good challenge, something requiring more than just the basic strategy round after round. But the more I searched, the more I wondered if I would ever find what I was looking for. Then, I came across Best Fiends, the mobile puzzle game that always leaves your brain feeling refreshingly challenged. And in a lot of ways, it sort of reminds me of camping and hiking with my friends. A great way to spend downtime re-energizing while still being a lot of fun. Best Fiends is now my go-to game at night when I'm chilling in bed and I can't sleep. In fact, some mornings, I even catch myself getting up a little earlier than normal just to get in a few levels before the day begins. And it's always a challenge to put the game down, really. But that's not a problem because Best Fiends never runs out of things to do. From thousands of puzzle games to solve to new events always coming online, I always have more to chew through. And one of my favorite things to do currently is to collect some of the rare fiends throughout these events. It's so satisfying when you finally get a hold of one of the rare fiends too, because they offer a lot of gameplay options and assist with some of the harder levels in really meaningful ways. And my kids also love this too, and they get so excited when we play and get a new fiend. They even have some nice little animated shorts coming out with the events too, which is a really nice touch of flavor for the game. But maybe you're like me and have some doubts about finding a puzzle game with more to offer. My advice? Give Best Fiends a try. Just don't blame me if you can't put it down. Download the 5-star rated puzzle game Best Fiends free today on the App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends. Recently, I had to make a quick run to Walmart after work for a few smaller items that I'd forgotten the day before. About halfway into my trip, I was approached by a woman and a young girl who asked me to buy a pack of diapers for them. Now, I do enjoy helping people whenever I can, but something felt incredibly off-putting about this situation. Something about the way that she strode right up to me and just asked. It felt very rehearsed, I think. I told her no in the most polite way that I could muster, and she nodded and went on. I was prepared to deal with potentially having turned away a woman who genuinely needed help, but like I mentioned, something just felt very wrong about it. I completed the rest of my shopping and was well on my way to forgetting the encounter, but when I made my way up to the self-checkout, suddenly the same lady and the little girl made a beeline for me. She doesn't look to me or speak to me or anything, and she and the girl just start scanning not only the diapers, but items that they had hidden in their clothes, racking up a huge total in the self-checkout. Completely stupefied that she just brazenly assumed that I would pay for it all, I got the attention of the associate and quietly explained the situation, making it clear that I wasn't trying to make a scene, but I simply didn't know these people, and I wasn't about to pay for their belongings now that I knew that it was a ploy. He told me that they'd apparently had to deal with her before, and I wasn't the first customer that she had a run-in with. He put on his most patient customer service voice and talked to the woman, at which point she pretended not to speak English, despite having had a pretty firm grasp on it earlier when asking me to buy diapers for them. She just kept pointing at me as if to indicate that she and the girl were with me. Thankfully, she wasn't fooling the associate, who by now had not only cleared her items from my checkout, but had placed himself between myself and the woman, still pretending that she couldn't understand him and still adamant that we were together. She was getting louder now, and things were escalating too, so I made a point to pay for my belongings, and I just hightailed it straight out of there. I hurried out to the car, closing the door just in time to see the little girl sprinting to catch up with me, the woman not far behind her. Panic set in, and suddenly I was trying to lock the doors quickly, throwing my groceries in and buckling up all at once. She was frantically tapping at my window as I cranked the car with what I assumed at first was her nails. I wasn't going to look until I caught the sun gleaming off of something. I turned to find that she wasn't tapping with her nails, but instead with the tip of a switchblade. She was also making slow, deliberate slicing motions with it. Just about the only thing that I could think to do at that point was throw my car into reverse and get out of there as quickly as I could. And as I did, she and the girl slowly walked in front of my car, heading back towards the store. As she was walking by, the woman turned and looked at me and gave what I could only describe as the most sinister smile that I've ever seen. Something was just so deeply insidious about the way that she gave me that knowing look. A truly diabolical version of the kind of look a mischievous kid gives you when you know that they're doing something that they're not supposed to. I was shaken, but ultimately I was okay. Though I would be lying if I said that I didn't look over my shoulder for a long while. So it was a summer night. I was around 8 or 9 years old. A group of 6 kids, we were playing manhunt, kind of like hide and seek, I guess, in our neighborhood. The street that we played on was a dead end with a baseball field at the end. The field was undergoing construction at the time, so there were sort of big construction vehicles parked and big mounds of dirt and stuff like that around. We were hiding and attempting to cross the field without getting caught by the opposing team. As we made our way across the field, a white truck flashed its lights at us. We were startled because we didn't think that there was anyone in the truck, and one of my friends started to run. I froze up and noticed 2 old men in the truck. The driver laughed at us as he rolled down the window and said, "It's too late for little girls to be out alone like this." He really creeped me out too. He had a thick mustache, wore big thick glasses and a baseball cap. And at that, we booked it out of there, and I don't remember much else from that night, other than the fact that one of my friends was so scared that she literally wet herself. But later on that week, one of my friends from that night and I, we were on one of our afternoon walks around town. As we walked by the town hall, though, something just pulled me to take a closer look at one of the notices taped up onto the window. And it was a sex offender listing for the creepy driver of that white truck. And even at that young age, my friend and I, we were aware of how dire a situation that we could have been in that night. We are so lucky. I still think about this encounter even as an adult because it was a weird one. So when I was about 10, I'm 25 now, I was downstairs watching TV late at night with my mum and sisters. Everyone decided to head off to bed and I was left alone downstairs just watching TV. I started drifting off at some point and all of a sudden, someone started banging on our door really hard. I'm talking let me in hard. I was so scared that I just sort of sat there frozen staring at the door like my life depended on it. My dog was laying right next to me and also just stared. He never barked or moved an inch, which was odd too because he always barked at the door. The banging never stopped for what seemed like a solid 5 minutes, but it was probably more like maybe a minute when I think back on it. In any case, I looked at my dog and I think because I finally moved, my dog snapped out of his trance, looked back at me for a split second, and jumped up and ran towards the door. He still didn't bark, but instead started turning his head like he was confused. I finally got the courage to get up and open the blinds to see what was going on. And this young woman, maybe around 20, 25, was standing there holding her left breast in her hand. It was still attached to her, but she was pretty large-breasted and she was holding it trying to keep them up from sagging, I'm guessing. I don't know, like I said, it was weird. But she had blonde hair, white skin, and was just covered in blood. Her shirt was ripped and her hair was a mess. I remember thinking that she may have gotten beat up or was in a car crash or something. Either way, I immediately went to go and open the door. But as soon as I went to unlock it, my mum, out of nowhere, slammed her hand on the door and relocked it. I had no idea that she'd even come downstairs at this point, let alone walked up behind me. I was so focused on the door and on this woman, I think, that when she slammed her hand, it was almost as if it knocked me back into reality. Reality of not opening the door for strangers in the middle of the night. I looked up at her and I could feel my eyes were wide, and I think I even started crying. She put her hand on my shoulder though and moved me away from the door. She yelled, "Who is it?" through the door, and the girl yelled back that her boyfriend had beat her up and that they lived in the apartment across the street from us. Mind you, we lived in a townhouse in a cul-de-sac. Our unit was all the way in the back where you would start the turn. What I mean is that we were the first unit in the row, but where she pointed out her and her boyfriend's place was at was quite a ways away from us. Anyway, my mum asked her name, and she said something that sounded like something Annie. Maybe Bethany or Stephanie or something. I saw my mum hesitate to open the door, but after she yelled, "Please help me," my mum opened the door, stepped out, and pulled it close to being shut, but not completely shut. I cracked the door behind her to make sure that she was okay and also see what was going on. The woman, that I guess we'll call Bethany from now on, kept thanking my mum and asking to come in because she was scared that her boyfriend was going to come after her. My mum refused and explained that she couldn't let her in because of the safety of her 4 kids, but said that she would sit out with her. My mum then yelled at me to grab the phone and call the police, so I did. My mum started asking her what happened and what specific unit that she lived in. She pointed towards her specific one and told my mum the building number and her unit, whatever it was, when this silver SUV pulled up a little later, and she ran towards it yelling, "That's my sister," and then just jumped in. The car sped off without another word from her, or even a single word from the sister. My mum looked back at me, confused, and came back inside and shut and locked the door. We just sort of stood there, and I think we just sort of looked at each other for a bit. I asked my mum eventually, what about the police, and she said that she would wait for them downstairs if I wanted to go to bed. I was too scared to leave her though, so I ended up just waiting with her. Once they arrived, my mum explained what happened, and the officer said that she did the right thing, not letting her inside. Weird thing though is that, like I said, my dog never barked once. Until the cops knocked on the door, that is. They also explained that they've been receiving similar calls like that in the area recently, so this was not the only event like this. Even worse though, the next morning we all packed up to go to the grocery store, and as we passed that building, you could definitely tell that that apartment that she allegedly lived in was completely empty. Like no one had been living in it. Maybe they just didn't have any furniture or anything, but I don't know. It was definitely fishy. Whatever happened that night, the alleged boyfriend never came after her that night, and we never saw her or the SUV ever again either. I hope that she is okay if it was real, but also, if it's not, well, don't ever knock on my door again, that's for sure. This happened a few years back when I worked at Starbucks. I was the opening supervisor, and our store was in kind of a rough area, I guess. I always tried to arrive a little early, and this day was no different. I pulled in before my coworker had gotten there, but in the otherwise empty parking lot was a truck parked sideways across 3 spots. The truck is facing the parking lot exit. Already wary, it's around 4:15 in the morning, and there were no working streetlights in the lot. I kept my doors locked and stayed in my car. Not a minute later, a man gets out of the truck and walks up to my car, knocks on my window. I crack the window an inch, and he starts telling me about how he has to get to the airport, and he's in a hurry, but his truck needs a push to start. He tells me specifically, "I just need you to come and push from my door. I'll be in the driver's seat and you'll give me the momentum that I need." I don't know anything about cars, but that set off alarms in my head. Not to mention if his car is having trouble, our airport was like really far away and only accessible by freeways. Not an easy trip for a struggling vehicle by any means. Fiends. I tell him that I'll be happy to push the truck from behind once my coworker arrives, but I refuse to do that before then. And with that, he immediately blows up. He screams and calls me all sorts of names and then just storms off back to his truck. He starts the truck up and speeds out of the parking lot. I never had anything come of it, but I'm still pretty sure that I foiled some sort of malicious plan from that guy. I'm grateful that I'm enough of a morning person to be thinking clearly that early, because if I hadn't been, I don't know what would have happened. This happened about 16 years ago when I was exactly 14 years old. Some parts are a little blurry, and I apologize in advance for that, but I've got most of the story in memory. So it was summertime, and as always, my mother and her best friend had decided to rent a house in the south, close to the beach, so we could all enjoy the summer holidays together. They had found this really nice house right next to the beach with a garden and enough space for all of us to fit. My mother's friend had her two sons, one who was 15 years old and came with his best friend, and then the younger brother who was 11 at that time. The neighborhood, from what I can remember, was quiet, mostly safe and surrounded by woods. But we didn't pay attention at that time as we were mainly spending our time on the beach, surfing and enjoying freedom. For me, it was a relief to be miles away from my hometown, to be honest. I'd had a very rough year facing school harassment that could have costed my life. Fortunately, my mother fought for me and changed me out of the school to finally bring some peace to my tormented mind. My bullies, they had posted online my phone number, making me receive calls from unknown people, mostly men, and this will play an important role at the end of the story. So, those holidays were an opportunity for me to just breathe, to disconnect from reality and just enjoy my time. But something very weird happened. Something that 16 years later I still try to think about. What would have happened to me if I had done this? You see, it started one afternoon. My phone buzzed with a text message. I thought at first it was my best friend telling me about her holidays. But we were all relaxing before going out to the restaurant later. I was sitting on the couch and playing Mario Kart with the boys, but the message was from an unknown number and said the following. "Oh honey, my heart only beats for you. I only think about you every day and every night." To be honest, at first, I thought it was just a wrong number. I simply replied with a polite message stating that it's probably a wrong number. As no one replied back too, I just let it go and kept playing on my Mario Kart session with my 11-year-old friends. Around 5:50 p.m, I'd say, while everybody was getting ready for the restaurant, I received another text message that really intrigued me. It said, "At 6 p.m, go out of your house alone and follow the arrows made out of sand. I'll wait for you at the end." I was now extremely confused and I didn't know what to do, to be honest. I replied and asked who was sending me these messages, but again, no reply. At 6 p.m, though, I walked out of the house just to take a peek out of the gate and see if there were actually really any sandy arrows, and yeah, they were there. Now, thinking back about this event, I realized that I was really reckless with what I did next. But as a 14-year-old teenager, hopelessly romantic and dreaming of having a very summer love experience, I thought that I would let my curiosity win this time. Now that I think about it too, all this time I thought that it was the 15-year-old brother and his best friend who wanted to make a joke about me or something. But the whole afternoon they were there with us, so I have no clue who may have done this, to be honest. In any case, though, I walked a bit out of the house and tried to follow the arrows that were leading straight into the woods. My intuition made me stop immediately at that. My gut was begging me not to go any further in the woods alone. So I turned around and I walked back to the house and never told anyone about this story. I simply received a text saying, "I'm waiting for you, darling," and That was it. But here's where the story gets a little creepy. You see, a few months later, I found out that where we rented the house, a man was being searched for, mostly because he was trying to get in contact with teenagers, and apparently was trying to drag them into the woods for, well, evil intentions. I still don't know if this is all linked to my own story, or if it was maybe just a coincidence. Would he have found my phone number on one of those websites that my bullies had given? No clue, but I changed my phone number when I started my scholarship at my new school, and I never got harassed again, thankfully. Like I said, though, I still think back about all of that, and I wonder. This is something that I've been needing to get off my chest for a while now, and I'm not really sure where else to tell it, to be honest. So a few years back, after my junior year of high school, I was working a summer job making enough money where I could support myself for a few days if need be. At the time, my parents decided that they wanted to take a trip to the beach for their anniversary, leaving me home by myself for a week, which was fine by me. And well, the time came and they left, leaving me and my dog to fend for ourselves. I should add context saying that it wasn't uncommon to hear footsteps or things moving on their own, as I've lived next to a graveyard all my life, and I just sort of took it as that's how things were, really. Well, about 3 days had passed since they had left, and I had just gotten off of work, and the sun had started to go and set, and by the time that I got home it was pretty much dark. The first thing that I noticed when I pulled into the driveway, though, was that I could see light through the window of my living room, which I thought was odd, but when I walked into my home, I quickly realized that every single light in my house had been turned on. Not thinking too much of it, I looked through the house and turned them off, only leaving my living room and kitchen light on. That was when I noticed, too, my dog was not laying in his bed. I found him underneath a cabinet in my bathroom, shaking to the point that I thought that he was sick. But he calmed down and came out after he saw that it was me. Like I said before, a little activity in the house was not uncommon, so I just thought that it was a strange occurrence and sort of shrugged it off. At this point, it's dark outside and had started pouring down rain, but I had to go and pick up dinner from somewhere, so I went and got Sonic, and when I was headed back, I had nearly forgotten about what had just happened, but sure enough, when I pulled back into the driveway, the lights were on again, but this time when I stepped foot into the house, I was hit by this just overwhelming stench, a smell so foul and pungent that it honestly made my eyes water immediately. That should have been my telltale sign to tuck tail and run as soon as I got there, but I didn't. I sat my food on the counter by the door and went to find my dog, who was laying in the corner of the living room, seemingly stressed to the point that he had puked on the floor. I quickly got him on his chain and out of the house and got to cleaning up the mess. At this point and time, the smell had only gotten worse too, and had this terrible feeling of fear that I can't even describe. I finished cleaning the mess though and realized that I should probably turn the lights off, so I started in the bathroom, into my father's room, and then into my room. Nothing eventful happened during this, but when I got to my mum's room, I could feel something just staring at me from behind, but when I looked back there, of course there was nothing there. In the end, I got out of there without turning the lights off, and when I was walking back up the hallway, I felt it again, but this time when I turned around, I saw something. This awful decayed or burnt looking thing was standing right where I'd come in from, the middle of the hallway, right outside of my mother's room. I froze in fear and just stared directly back at him. His eyes were almost human too, but way too sunken back, and I could see the sort of dark charred skin hanging from his face. I have no idea how long it stayed like this, but eventually I tore myself back, and when I looked back over there, the thing was gone. and the lights in my mother's room had turned off. I remember just sitting on the floor after that in tears, just staring at the spot where this thing was. I must have sat there for about 10 minutes at least before finally getting my nerve together and sprinting out of my house, grabbing my dog and just staying in my truck the entire night. By the time that we had went back in, the sun had come back up and things seemed to be back to normal. I never really mentioned this to anyone, and I probably wouldn't have, but I saw it again yesterday at a quick glance while doing the dishes. It was standing just a few meters away from me behind the table, but it was gone as soon as I blinked. From everything that I've researched too, this sounds demonic, and the activity in the house has increasingly picked up since that day. If you're listening to this and have some sort of knowledge about the paranormal or demonic, then please do let me know if this sounds like that. Also, if you have any advice on what I can do to get rid of it, that would be much appreciated. I was a lead bartender in a pool hall in the outskirts of New Orleans for about 10 years. Our main patrons, they were older men who mostly lived alone, but we were the spot that they sort of came to socialize. Many came for long hours every day, whether they played pool that particular day or not. Over the years, many of these men passed, a few men dying in the building. We had a few fatal heart attacks and a stroke victim who passed before the EMTs could get there. Sadly, this bar was the last place many of these men had felt happy and needed in their lives, which I think may have drew some of them back after passing. Also, bars have long been rumored to be favorite hangouts for earthbound spirits who don't realize that they're dead and are craving one more drink or smoke, or possibly game of pool in this case. And with that said, there was definite activity in the bar or pool hall, though it was a bit on and off. A male voice would loudly say my name, directly in my ear with a blast of warm air, as if it had breath, when I was nowhere near any living person. At the beginning of my shift, the bar was usually empty, so I would go into the office to count the money in the gaming safe. I always kept the camera feeds up on the monitor, just in case someone came in. I can't tell you how many times I would look at the monitor and see someone just sitting at the bar waiting for service, even though I hadn't heard the door chime. I would head out to the bar only to find it empty. Most often it was a really pale white guy with dark hair, white tee, black jacket. And one day, my first customer of the shift came in and sat in the seat that the pasty guy had been in on the camera feed about maybe an hour or two before. I didn't say anything, not wanting to sound crazy. I was behind the bar and about 10 feet from the customer when he screamed like a little girl and jumped up so fast that he sent his chair flying backwards. He swore up and down, too, that someone had just grabbed his leg and squeezed. He said that he could feel the individual fingers and everything. We were the only two people in the bar, though, and he left immediately, still shaking. I saw people in my peripheral that weren't there, too, when I turned towards them. Many times I would be serving drinks and call out, "I'll be right with you as soon as I finish here," before turning to see no one. I thought it might just be me seeing things, but it literally never happened anywhere else except at work. And several times customers remarked that they could have sworn that they had seen someone who had just been standing there as well. Now, to get behind the bar, you had to go to the end farthest from the entrance, where a section of the bar lifted up like a door. To the right was where the bartending happened, but to the left was a hallway that had the office and rooms with the safers, extra liquor bottles, stuff like that. Basically, everything down that hallway had a lot of value, and the bartenders were expected to make sure that no one came behind the bar or gained access to the hallway. But I always saw people walking back there. Not from my peripheral either. These people looked very solid and real. I could easily describe their skin and hair color even, outfits, the whole shebang. I would go running back there, check all of the 3 rooms down the hallway, panicking, and eventually not find a soul. even though the only way out would have been to pass me. Let me just say too that this happened all the time, whether I was slow or busy. It actually seemed to happen more when the bar was packed, in fact. My regulars were very familiar with this routine too and teased me about it unmercifully. However, word of this did cause my co-workers to begin sharing their own experiences with me, so I was able to get some confirmation, at least that I wasn't going crazy. The activity, which had always been intermittent too, got really intense for almost 2 months at one point. And then, everything just sort of stopped. For months. The guy who got his leg grabbed and a few other regulars who had witnessed some things commented on it too. So did my co-workers. And no more chasing shadows or disappearing customers. To be honest, it was sort of great, really. A few months after the activity stopped at the bar, though, I'm taking a shower at home. It's a stand-up shower, no tub. I noticed that the far right corner of my shower seemed very dim, though. I peeked my head out to make sure that none of the other 3 bathroom bulbs had burned out or something. They were all shining away, and I just sort of shrugged it off. Even though I definitely had a slightly unsettling feeling. It was nothing major, though, and I just continued for several weeks like this. Although not every day it would happen, and the feeling of unease grew. It wasn't always dim over there, but when it was, I swear that I could feel it before even looking. The shower is my happy place, and I hated this newfound creepiness invading it. I tried to think of every possible explanation too. Seasonal changing of the angle of sunlight, weather or cloud conditions, my mental state. I mean, you name it, I thought of it. However, I had lived there for over 5 years at this point, and had never seen anything remotely like this. I have one tiny bathroom window with thickly frosted glass and a screen, so it's never really affected the lighting in the bathroom in any way, and it's angled away from the shower anyway, so how the heck was this happening? Weirdly too, as time went on, the dimness grew more pronounced. It now looked more like a diffused, shadowy mist than a dim spot. The feeling of unease, it began to change too. I started feeling like something was watching me while I showered. I found myself refusing to close my eyes or turn around when showering, and seriously considered how long I could go between showers before it became, well, noticeable. I had been trying to convince myself that it was all some kind of stress-induced, psychosomatic weird thing that my brain was doing, or a strange type of vision anomaly or something, but I was completely unsuccessful. I finally accepted that there was actually something there, watching me at my most vulnerable point, and enough was enough. I contacted a friend and told him a little bit about what I'd felt, and expressed my desire to do a house cleansing. I didn't want to do it alone, and he agreed to come over in 2 days. Feeling better about the whole situation now, I had a slightly smug air as I started my shower that night. Lo and behold, there was no darkness, no shadows, no weird feelings. It was great too. Maybe I had been tripping after all, so to speak. I'm under the water though, with my eyes closed, enjoying the heck out of my bright, peaceful shower, when a shock of alarm just jolted through me. It felt like someone was standing right there in front of me and staring at me hard. When I opened my eyes, the shadow, it was there, and looked different than ever before. It was much darker. There was clearly visible sort of oval egg-shaped center of deeper darkness in the middle of the shadows, although I could still see through it. The top of it was slightly lower than my upper chest. I'm just under 5 foot, and it didn't have hard edges at all, just kind of diffused out to light a shadow, if that makes sense. The oval was roughly 3 feet from top to bottom and about 1.5 feet wide, and I just stood frozen, staring at it for a few seconds. It was like my brain was having trouble processing what I was seeing. Then my brain started working again, and I jumped out of the shower, stark naked and half rinsed, ran through the house, dripping shampoo and water everywhere, yelling, "What the heck?" over and over. I'll admit that it's pretty hilarious to picture it now, but at the time, I was scared out of my mind. I skipped my shower the next day, obviously, and when my friend arrived the day after, I frantically filled him in on what had happened the night that we agreed to do the cleansing, although I did leave out the part about running around naked and yelling. He had this little smirk on his face, so I asked him if he believed me. "Oh, I believe you. I believe that you saw something." Slightly patronizing, but understandable given the situation, I guess. Besides, I thought having a skeptic on hand could be a good thing, maybe. So I started burning herbs on charcoal and calling in protection. We began in the living room, and as soon as I called for protection, my friend jumped and gasped. Eyes popping out of his face, he took a few steps back and sat on the couch. He was very pale all of a sudden and had his ankles tightly crossed and his hands clasped firmly in his lap, elbows tucked in, sitting very straight. Although he didn't know this, he had automatically assumed a pose recommended to close off your energy or aura, for those of you who know about that. The poor guy, though, just looked horrified. He claimed that as soon as I called out for protection, a bone-chilling blast of frigid air went straight through his entire body. I was standing right in front of him at the time, and he was amazed that I didn't feel anything. He was completely freaked out, though, and I convinced him that finishing the cleansing was important after experiencing something like that. So he bravely got up, and he began helping me cleanse my place. After we were through, I decided to let the herbs finish burning out of the shower. When I went to the shower, which we had just spent a lot of time in, smoking it out with herbs, there was a single black fat fly laying dead on its back right in the corner that the shadow liked to hang out in. We were both absolutely certain that it wasn't there a few minutes before. While I realized that flies get into houses, obviously, the timing and the placement was really freaky. Like, we had just seen this and then it was there. I've been here 7 or 8 years now too, and that was the first, last, and only time that I've ever found one of those big black corpse flies in my apartment like that too. Thankfully, I haven't had any issues with shadows in my shower since. To this day, my friend gets noticeably freaked out when I bring up the cleansing, so I like to do it when we're drinking, and his expressions are even funnier than usual. But I don't think it was a shadow person or a demon or anything like that. I think it was a ghost without the energy to fully manifest, but who still liked to peep on 20-something females while they were showering. I never saw or felt it anywhere or anytime else while it was in my place. I honestly think that whatever it was, though, it was perverted. I also think that it most likely was that pasty guy who liked to mess with me at work, just eventually following me home. But to be honest, who knows? He's long gone now, but probably lurking in the corner of some other poor woman's shower. This happened in 2012, and it caused me to be scared of my room for years. Heck, even still to this day. Summer night after 10 p.m, it was pitch black outside already. I was watching a comedy with my boyfriend on his laptop in my room upstairs. He got hungry, so made his way down to the kitchen to make some sandwiches. While he was downstairs, I had the habit on summer nights to chill at my open window. It's sort of like a ceiling window, and feel the summer night breeze on my skin, and listen to the sounds of nocturnal animals. I would just sort of sit there and enjoy it all. I would also like to state that I'd been in a pretty good mood up to this point, and really had no reason to hallucinate or anything like that. But from one moment to another, it just got really quiet all of a sudden. And when I say quiet, I mean like deadly still. And then I just heard a whisper, clear as day in my ear, in my language mind you, say, "I'm going to catch you now." First I turned around thinking my boyfriend was messing with me, but then I heard it again. There was nobody in the room too, and it was like a weird whisper, a whisper that sent chills down my spine. I froze for a second. I ran downstairs, still hoping that it was a sick prank. While my parents were in their room watching TV, my boyfriend was literally in the middle of fetching his food. I told him what happened, and he just didn't know what to say. He's a skeptic. Weirdly, I have not heard that whisper since that summer that it happened. It was scary, though. Talking in a future sense, I will catch you now. I don't know. I don't know if I was hallucinating or if it was really something in the room with me, but please share your thoughts about what you think happened. Between 2006 and 2010, I actually worked at a Blockbuster. It was, hands down to this day, the best job I've ever had. There was a program too that I can't remember the name of, where you could choose between 1 or 2 DVDs that you could rent at once and keep for however long, and then exchange them for like 1 or 2 more, continuously paying a monthly price instead of by the movie. That deal would only be good for the particular store that you signed up in, so we would get to know the people who were on these plans because they were always in the store. And we had one regular couple named Patrick and his girlfriend. I can't remember her name. But Patrick, he taught karate for kids and always came in wearing his karate outfit. They had kids with them, but I believe that they were the girlfriends. He was one of our favourite regulars, and he would always joke around, and when we had our game setups like Rock Band, Guitar Hero, Call of Duty, he and my co-workers would play when it wasn't busy. I would say that he was in the store maybe once every 2 days for a year before he just stopped coming in. I remember working the day that he came in and told us that he was moving to the next town over, so he was going to go to that Blockbuster near his home instead. I remember telling him how much we'll miss seeing him and actually felt pretty sad about it. Well, one day in 2009 I went into work and my co-workers were all in the back talking about a murder. It was big news in my small town, and particularly sad as it was a couple that had fostered a lot of special needs kids and seemed really nice. Well, apparently Patrick, he was the ringleader. I saw pictures of him while he was being arrested and in court, and man, it gave me the chills. His happy, smiling face that came in the store all those times was now cold and just literally different. What made him look so stupid, though, was his method. They all literally wore ninja suits like the ones that he would wear in his karate classes. I had some odd experiences growing up. My mum told me when I was little that I used to tell her about frequent out-of-body experiences that involved floating through the house and even outside. I had a near-drowning experience when I was 4 or 5, which may have been an NDE. I do recall the life review that people talk about, but nothing else. The various paranormal things like having a radio turn on without batteries in it, but in every instance, I just moved on without thinking too much about it. But there was also a lot of unfortunate childhood trauma, which I won't dig into here, but want to note because trauma is such a common element with this subject. The most interesting childhood event happened, though, when I was 6. My sister and I were playing outside while our babysitter was doing the dishes after lunch. There was a cornfield near the babysitter's house, which neither of us had been in before, and I wanted to go into it for some reason. But my sister, who was 8, refused because she was too scared, and I walked a little ways in and then cut over from one row to the next, and I instantly found myself no more than like 3 inches away from what I could only perceive as a giant grasshopper. It was mottled down and a little taller than I was even. It was looking directly at me and slowly pushing apart the stalks of corn with its, well, hands, I guess you could call them. I ran out of the corn terrified and found my sister in tears telling me that she couldn't find me. Well, we ran back to the babysitter who tried to calm me down, and all I kept saying was that it was looking right at me. I remember it vividly, but I never came up with any sort of explanation for it. So, that was weird. In 2020, it was right around a year ago that I had a very dramatic but brief OBE. I was falling asleep and suddenly had the sensation of tilting up and out of my body. I had an immediate awareness of, oh no, and it felt just like a rubber band pulled me back into my body, and I woke up and was very shaken. It was an extremely vivid sensation, and when I looked into it, I found out that it was a classic out-of-body experience, including the tilt. Fast forward a couple of weeks, I'd been reading Leslie Kean's excellent book about the afterlife called Surviving Death, and being a rational, scientific-minded individual, decided to test things myself. At bedtime, I said out loud, if there are any spirits in here, make a loud noise to let me know. It was less than an hour later when I heard a loud crash in the house that scared the cat to the point where he froze and wouldn't leave the bed. I searched that night, and the next day even, and found nothing to explain what I heard. I even got a ladder and checked the roof to see if a branch fell on it or something. It would have been a huge branch based on the sound though, but like I said, I just never found anything. A few nights later, though, I asked for the spirits again, but this time I said, please knock 3 times to be less ambiguous, and then knocked on my headboard as an example. As I was falling asleep, I heard a voice in my left ear say, dum dum dum, in a sort of musical lilt. Strangely, that was the ear against my pillow too. I found this pretty strange, obviously, but rationalized it away as a hallucination from my subconscious based on my request. I've heard voices like this occasionally in the past over the years and know that it's not uncommon when falling asleep. A couple of weeks later, though, something else happened. In almost every instance I'm going to mention, it was about a 2 or 3 week interval, almost like it was on a schedule or something. So my ex encouraged me to get a tarot deck so I could do some tarot readings for her. I did a couple, which she thought was very accurate. I decided to use the deck for myself, so I shuffled it well and then drew a card. It was the Fool. I looked up the meaning, a person starting on a new journey, then shuffled it back into the deck and drew another. The Fool again. So I put it back into the deck and shuffled it more thoroughly and then tried again. And you probably guessed it, the Fool. By now I was a little bit freaked out by that. I shuffled again, being super thorough this time and cutting the deck to make sure I wasn't doing anything weird that might cause it. And I drew it again, and then stopped using the deck because I was pretty upset. I calculated the odds later, and it was like around 1 in like 470,000 or so. 78 cards in the deck. It got my attention for sure though, and again, it was just weird. But it was after this that I started finding blood stains on my pillow and sheets. I could never find the source for the blood, having carefully checked my cats and myself for any scabs, bites, or wounds. My fear at the time was bedbugs, and so I tore everything apart and used a black light to carefully check, but I never found a cause. Keep this in mind for later too. But then I started having synchronicities, lots of them. Also little precognitive sort of events, such as knowing what cards I'm going to draw from the deck and stuff. All of them can be easily rationalized away, I know that, but they're happening so frequently that I'm having increasing trouble doing so. One night I have a dream about someone that I used to work with at a job about maybe 3 years ago, I think. But no one special, we hadn't had any contact since then. But in the dream I told him that he was looking great. He had lost a lot of weight, and he said that he was much happier and that he and his wife had gotten a divorce. The next day I mentioned this to my ex because she still works with him and it just seemed weird. And later that afternoon she calls me to inform me that he had just called her and they hadn't spoken in months. And one of the things that he told her was that he was getting a divorce from his wife. I was finally forced to acknowledge that I couldn't keep writing these things off as just a crazy coincidence any longer. Meanwhile, a friend of mine tells me that I should listen to Stuart Davies' podcast, Aliens and Artists. I was familiar with Stuart because my wife and I had seen him perform live back in 2014. We both commented on how we felt very connected to him somehow and that he must be very charismatic or something. So I listen to one of the episodes at random. I tell my friend that it's interesting. He knows that I've been obsessed with UFOs for years, and he says, "Did you listen to the first one? You have to listen to the first one." So I do, and in it, Stuart talks about meeting a mantis being. I'm listening to him describe it and suddenly have a realization, like, this sounds a lot like that thing that I saw in the cornfield when I was 6. So I Google mantis being images, and one of the first things I see is someone's drawing of one, and man, I just have a moment when I realize that this is what I saw all those years ago. Side note too, I asked my friend months later why he insisted I listen to the first episode, and he said it was because I had the mantis incident when I was a kid. I reminded him that I didn't even know what that was up until after I listened to the episode, and my friend paused and then said weird, and I agreed. Anyway, I contact Stuart via Twitter and tell him. Long story short, we communicate and he offers to do some hypnosis with me to see what he can find. In the session, I start talking about seeing lights shining on the wall from in my crib and become so terrified that we had to stop the session. I'm now obviously very confused. The next time I have therapy, which is twice a week, and I'll note that I have been communicating all of this oddness with my therapist as it's happening. I tell her about it and that I want to talk to someone who isn't into aliens. She refers me to a local hypnotherapist who is board certified and takes my insurance. Meanwhile, I'm doing lots of research into hypnosis and how fallible it is and how easy it is for the therapist to lead the subject. I had a recording of the session with Stuart and was also conscious, so I knew that there was no leading of any type going on, but hey, I just had to check anyway. After many weeks of hypnotherapy dealing with my chronic pain and such, we randomly end up back on that same incident. We follow it through, and it involves my entire family being abducted by grey aliens and mantis beings. And at one point, I see my parents naked on the table, my dad grappling with a grey alien, my mum apparently paralysed. I remember 2 mantises. The brown one from the cornfield is the one doing apparent medical experiments. A smaller green one functions as my handler and feels benevolent to me. I indicate at one point that there are over 20 incidences of abduction going back to childhood. We do a number of sessions and they only get weirder too. In one, I'm taken to another planet for education. I finally stop the sessions because I'm just too overwhelmed by them, to be honest. I've become convinced that it's all my subconscious concocting an elaborate story for some reason, but I leave myself open to the possibility and work to try and see if I can confirm any of the details whatsoever. What the beings look like, the inside of the ship, how the greys move, smells, even the planet itself, and I end up communicating directly with many other experiences and confirm enough obscure details that I finally acknowledge that, I know this sounds crazy, it likely has happened. And the kicker is the other things that support it. For example, you remember how I mentioned those blood spots? Well, finding blood spots on my pillow during a period when I was apparently being abducted. Weird bruises. My security camera shutting off for extended periods. Almost always between 1 and 3 in the morning. And then there's the implants. Now, I have a lot of health issues. Tons of them. Really rare stuff too, so I'm told. It turns out this is common with a lot of experiences though. But due to my health issues, I got a lot of MRIs. And one of the things they found was a spinal epidural lipomatosis. Confirmed by many specialists, but they didn't want to remove it due to its location. They told me to follow up on it, obviously, which I did a couple of years later. And I know this is hard to believe, but it vanished. This is obviously unheard of. So unheard of that there's a single published paper on it happening in one known instance. And I guess I make 2. The MRIs also found what has been diagnosed as glioma, which is a brain tumor, but mine hasn't changed in size in at least 4 years, which again is pretty unheard of. Under hypnosis, I said that it was an implant. I didn't believe it, but while all of this madness is happening, I start having full-on psychic visions. One of them was with another person on the internet, and I accurately described everything in their room, down to the position of their pet laying in the bed next to them. I start playing around though with remote viewing and have continued success, some of it with like a 80% plus accuracy. Next, I start having mediumship, in which I'm getting flashes of images or occasional audio messages that are confirmed by living relatives or Google searches. This genuinely freaks me out, mind you, because I don't know what is happening, so I've mostly stopped doing it. But it was accurate to around 50% of the time, I would say, which I'm told is pretty high. Needless to say, though, I'm so confused at this point that I start genuinely disassociating. My entire worldview about what is real and what isn't, it just broke me down. Thankfully, my therapist and psychiatrist confirmed that I wasn't genuinely psychotic, just under too much stress. But to try and get a better understanding of it all, I was consulting all kinds of books and reaching out to authors, researchers, other RVers and respected psychics, anyone that I could think of who could help. I finally managed to get in touch with someone who used to do contract work for the CIA back in the days of Project Stargate and the like. Dr. Kit Green referred to her as his most trusted psychic and said that she was nearly 100% accurate on her remote viewing work. Turns out, she's now offering readings for the public, but the CIA talk is obviously strictly forbidden. I hired her to help me try and figure out some of my health issues at least, as well as investigate the abduction stuff. To be honest, I just couldn't think of any other way to prove to myself whether it was true or not, so I tested her out. And she was incredible. She identified many of my health issues without me even telling her anything about it. She also confirmed the abductions and said that they were ongoing and implicated my sister as well. I'd never even mentioned that I had a sister. But what am I supposed to do with that, right? So, this is where I am at now. I'm a member of the Experiencer group, which has been incredibly helpful, supportive, and informative. I occasionally play with RV, but have decided to mostly stop with the Psi stuff for now for personal reasons having to do with the spiritual growth stuff that I'm going through. What I've learned, though, is that the world is far weirder than people realize. And it turns out that people who have had these kinds of experiences seem to somehow become attuned to the wider world, if that makes sense. But one experience says that it's like the others tune in your personal radio and then leave it switched on, and I have to agree. If you want theories on all of this, I suggest you go to experts like Dr. Jeffrey Cripple. And believe me, I know that all of this sounds very fabricated, but I have evidence for a lot of it. Screenshots of conversations, photos of bloody pillows, RV drawings. I'm willing to share them if anyone is interested. Just go back to the post. Also, please ask for specifics and I'll do my best to get them to you. I will admit, though, that I'm honestly hesitant because even I had a hard time believing it for months and I was the one actually experiencing it. It's easy to rationalize it away, I know that. As a matter of fact, I've come to believe that it's almost one of the defining characteristics of interacting with this phenomenon. It seems like the intent is actually to get individuals to have an awakening and not the world at large. We are each given opportunities, and it seems like it's up to us what we do with them. When I've tried to tell my friends about this, their worldview was challenged and they just refused to accept it, so I've been very reluctant to share, and I still am most of the time anyway. But if you're still listening to this, then thanks for bearing with me. I haven't taken the time to try and write all of it down like this before, and it's a lot, I know, and I've glossed over large areas for the sake of brevity, but if you want specifics, then please do just ask and I'll do my best. Also, I'm not selling a book, I don't have a blog, this is not any type of self-promotion or anything. I'm only sharing this because so many people ask for my story, and there's a lot of stuff that I've left out, but they're definitely the highlights. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.